I've been asked briefly to recount something that we now often see as solidified history, the Regent and Regentess rooms of almshouses and social institutions. I will discuss two rooms in Amsterdam for this purpose, namely the Regent rooms of the Deutzenhofje, here we are, or well, the Deutzenhofje itself, here on the screen, and that of the Burgerweeshuis, the city's orphanage, now the Amsterdam Museum. The question I asked myself with regard to these two rooms, is it actually solidified history, or what are we looking at? Almshouses or hofjes are a typically Dutch phenomenon, as you probably are aware of. Up to the present day, there are 212 hofjes in 8 Dutch cities. Of these, 97 hofjes still perform their original function of single and two-person housing. There have been dozens of hofjes in Amsterdam. At the moment, there are still 57 of them. A hofje is a residential community established by private individuals. Wealthy, prominent citizens had a hofje built after their death by means of their will. There was often a clearly defined access policy, meant only for single women, or one had to adhere to a particular religion, such as Mennonite or Roman Catholic. And I think this is really interesting. There were no hofjes for men, sorry. The board usually, men most of the time, usually consisted of a number of regents. They met, mostly weekly, in the regent's room. Interestingly enough, many hofjes were founded by childless persons. They did so out of love for the poor, but also certainly for their own peace of mind. In this way, they could let their name live on and preserve it for posterity. The women lived here for free and also received medical care and things like peat, rice, beans and butter. It was elderly care and social housing all in one. Usually, the living quarters of the residents were very simple but purposeful. An exception to this were the regent or governor's room, also called, which were sometimes richly decorated. So now here we are, number one. It's not often immediately visible where these regent rooms are located in the building or buildings. In the 17th century, the hofjes were often modest in size and often built in the Jordaan district in Amsterdam. From the end of the 17th century onwards, more imposing hofjes also appeared along the Amsterdam Canal. Only when you look closer do you see that the regent room was often situated, I have to go back, I guess, no. Only when you look closer do you see that the regent room was often situated above the entrance, often on a prominent canal side, as was the case with the Deutzenhofje, from 1694, which is located at Pritsengracht. What makes the interior of this regent room so special is that the testator Agneta Deutz was extremely specific in her demands and wishes. She stipulated that a number of family items should adorn the walls of the room. The executors of her will were also allowed to choose objects they deemed appropriate for this room. Thus, originally there were 12 paintings hanging in the regent's room, including portraits of herself, here on the right, and her two husbands. At Agneta's request, a number of silver objects, such as 4 candlesticks, a ewer, and a dish, were also added. These, by the way, are now on display in the Rijksmuseum, and they were on loan to the Rijksmuseum since 1925 already. But she also, for instance, had thought of the writing cabinet on this room. Here on your left, you can see it. In one of her codicils, that of 12 December 1691, it is described in Dutch, I'm afraid, as follows. I quote, "Den zilveren kruiddoos wil ik dat bewaard zal werden tot gebruik van het hoffie, als mede de gedreven lampet en gieter, en 4 gedreven zilveren kandelaars, en voorts zo de heren executeurs goed vinden meerder te behouden." This regent's room of the Deutzenhofje is an exceptional example. You have to remind yourself of that. Not only because of the ensemble of the objects, which are still there or in the Rijksmuseum, There's also an extensive archive to dive into, but there's always a but. For instance, in the second half of the 18th century, a number of paintings again came to the Hofje. In 1771, the wealthy Elisabeth Boers van Wavre died. Her cousin, Cornelis Deutz van Assendelft, then one of the regents, donated a good number of portraits. These were hung not only in the regent's room, but also in the office, the corridor, and the staircase. My point is, for this Deutsche Hofje, you have to look closely in this case, but even the solidified history of this exceptional regent room is made up of several layers. Each layer will have its meaning and purpose. Going to number 2, the city's orphanage. These layers of history also apply to the regent's room in the orphanage. In the first decades of the 17th century, the buildings that together had become the orphanage were extensively built and rebuilt. In 1634, the regent's room was built. The builder's owners, so to say, had themselves immortalized by a group portrait by Abraham de Vries for this occasion. During the 17th century, several paintings were added, like the painted ceilings from 1656 and another group portrait in 1663 by Juriaan Ovens. And a final edition in terms of group portraits followed in 1716 by the hand of Arnold Bonen. During the 18th century, different type of windows were added, as well as coat of arms, and new furniture was ordered. In the third quarter of the 19th century, in 1897 to be precise, a restoration was carried out. The idea was to take the old Dutch style as the starting point. New parquet was laid, the furniture was refurbished and added, and new curtains were made and 2 Deventer carpets were placed on the floor, as you can see here on the beautiful drawing by Rieke. During the restoration of the orphanage into the Amsterdam Historical Museum in the late 1960s and early 70s, people had another idea. On your left, it is not the regent room but an adjacent room. It is clear that there was an extensive restoration. It was thought that this type of room, probably because of one of the group portraits, had a black and white marble and hard stone floor. However, there is no evidence whatsoever for this, and it would have been unlikely for this type of room as well. Nevertheless, such a room was installed. Here you see a picture of 2008. So, in this regent's room, there were several layers of history as well. Since the room was part, we are now closed due to the renovation of the building, and will be part of the museum routing, layers are still being added. This is these days usually done by asking artists to respond to this space. Fortunately, it thus remains not only a solidified but also a living history. And I guess we can have a discussion about that. Anyway, like I said, it's a very brief talk now, but I want to end this talk with some short remarks regarding this, especially on regent rooms, because I think they're so incredibly important for us, for our history. Regent rooms are a special part of urban heritage, which deserves much more attention and therefore much more research. I hope there are young researchers in the room, young scholars. Get your PhD and work on the regent room. The ensembles, often including not only portraits of the testators, but also their pewter writing utensils, together with the often preserved archives, very important, are a formidable source for research and therefore a quintessential part of Dutch domestic culture. But all in this, the future generation, the future researcher should not forget that consolidated regent rooms are the result of layers of history. So there's much more than meets the eye. Thank you very much.